Do today is to keep looking at how to start another screen and pass information along and then pass the information back. But also at the same time, I'm going to show you a subroutine that I wrote, well, last night, that I think is kind of useful because it allows you to what I call serialize, a structure like a list that can have multiple items into a single text string. Okay, AI2 App Inventor 2 already has the ability to decode a text string like that and turn it back into a structure. So the decoding part, no problem. We have the mechanisms to do it already. But the encoding part, for whatever reason, is missing from App Inventor 2. So I just finished writing that piece so that for anyone who wants to save not only like one or two pieces of information, but want to save like an entire structure, now we have the mechanism to do it. So I just want to show you that today, and also to continue to talk about how to start up another screen. So this is the app that I wrote, pretty much last night to kind of test it. It's not really particularly useful, but I do want to show you what the code looks like, and also some of the more advanced feature of programming. If you do not understand the blocks or the code or the logic of this particular program, don't worry. Okay, it is kind of a little bit more than where we are supposed to be at this point. Especially if you have not taken the class like cisp300 or 370 before, and you're taking that in this same semester, you may not be able to handle, or may not be able to understand, the logic of this program because we're not quite there yet at that point in your other class. But on the other hand, if you have taken 300, 370, or 301 CISP classes, you might find this program just kind of interesting. I didn't know that I can do something like that with App Inventor 2. So how much you get out of this one, is kind of up to you, kind of up to your background and also what you want to do. But I do want to show you what it does. And I'll go ahead and start up the emulator first. So AI starter. I have to start this one up first so that the browser would be able to start up the emulator here. So I'm going to start up the emulator to show you what the program does when it runs, and then I'll go back and show you the blocks, how it is all done. Okay, it can potentially be useful because it can combine multiple items, like a structure. If you already have taken classes that explain what a structure or record is, it can combine an entire record and treat it as a single item. So that makes it easy for you to transmit something to a server or to retrieve something from a server, and it's considered to be one single string, a single item, but inside is actually a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, so it gives you that kind of flexibility. It's getting there. I also found a way to install APKs, onto the emulator. It's not straightforward, but it can be done. So I'm going to show you that as well today. Alright, so it's starting up. It's going to load up the app, and I'm going to run it first to show you what it does. Alright, so here's the emulator. It has got 3 buttons and 4 labels. The first button is responsible to create a list, and then it will do 2 things. One is it will save it into TinyDB, and then the second thing is it will also turn it into regular text using my own subroutine. So this way we can see what is the content of the list and how it displays as a single string, even though it is a list that consists of a sublist and also one individual item. So let's click that first, save and encode. So it will do both, and this is the text representation of what I'm trying to create here. I think the whiteboard is not going to work as well. What I'll do is I'm going to start up a text editor here because I think it's too small. People in the back definitely cannot see it. So I want to show you what it looks like first, and then we'll go back to the program to show you the code that creates it. So we have 2 open square brackets, double quote A, close double quote, comma, open double quote, backslash double quote, backslash, open double quote, close double quote, comma, and then another end double quote, end close square bracket, comma, 0, and then close square bracket. So that's the string that is displayed here. It is the text representation of a list that consists of another list. The inner list consists of two things. One is just a string of lowercase a. The other one is a string that has a double quote, a backslash, and open square bracket, close bracket, and a comma. That's the content of the other string. And then outside, on the outside topmost list, there's also a separate item. The second item is just a number 0. So that's what the text representation looks like when after my subroutine is done with it. So all the backslash here, this one is really just saying I just want a double quote as a part of the string, but I can't.
Like a literal quote.
Yeah, like a literal quote inside the string, but I can't just use a double quote, because if the program sees another double quote, it will think, oh, you want to close this string now, it becomes an empty string. So the backslash character is called what we call an escape character. What it does is to tell whatever is parsing this and say, hold on a second here, okay? Whatever is following this backslash is the character that I want to represent. Is that okay so far? So it is a mechanism so that we can deal with tricky characters that normally would be kind of like, oh, if I use double quotes to quote a string, how do we put a double quote inside the quoted string? This is how you do it. Okay, so now the next problem is, how do we represent a backslash itself? Because if a backslash has a special meaning of escaping the character that is right next to it, then how do we represent a single backslash? Well, the answer is 2 backslashes. the first backslash acting as an escape character, and then the second backslash is what is being escaped. Okay, so this stuff is kind of, I know it's kind of tricky if this is the first time you encounter this, but it is very useful. It's almost universal in all programming languages. You need to have some way to escape characters. This one is just literal. Okay, if you want to use a open square bracket inside a quoted string, you can just use a single, open square bracket, close square bracket same way, and a comma. Because the comma is actually useful in the outer representation. It is used to separate items in a list. But as long as it is inside the quoted string, it does not need to be escaped. So I was just using this to test, what needs to be escaped and what does not need to be escaped. Soft drink. Sorry. All right. So this is what this little text is. So the next 2 buttons, one is to load it back, load the list back from DB1, TinyDB. So I click this one here, and it reads back. And if you, well, I mean, most people cannot see it. So what is displayed here is A, followed by double quote, backslash, open square bracket, close square bracket, and a comma. And then the last one is a 0. If you look at these 3 items, which reflects, this item here, that's the single letter A. This item here, which even though it looks kind of convoluted, when it's quoted, it really is just a single double quote, a single backslash, open square bracket, close square bracket, and a comma. And then the last item is this 0 over here. Okay, so this is just a test. Okay, so the load button is really just to test to see if I can save a list into TinyDB and then read it back as a list. And the experiment was successful. It was able to do that. And then the third button, let me just do this again to clear the space here. The third button is to take this text here and then try to decode it using the web component. There is a method in the web component to decode this type of representation. So I'm trying to make sure that the way that I encode things is consistent with the way that App Inventor wants to decode things. Okay, because I need to check to make sure that that works. So when I click decode, it's reading back this text here, which is the same thing as this part here, and come back to the individual components, and it did it also correctly here. Yep.
I have a question. So does this do the escape characters work with single quotes also?
It will also work for a single quote, but a single quote does not need to be escaped. You can
Okay.
always escape things that do not need to be escaped. Basically, you're just saying, okay, here's a backslash, which means that whatever is following the backslash is literally just that. Okay, but if you did something that does not need to be escaped, like let's say a punctuation that, like a period, that does not need to be escaped, it will just work fine, but you don't need it.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I was working on a bash script and it was giving me a hell of a time. Like bash script, you can't escape character single quotations.
Right. Yeah,
It's
because well, maybe differently. I
like, I
you
tried
can
so many different ways, it was killing me.
you might need to use the ASCII code, like \0 and then followed by the 3-digit, octal code for the ASCII code. That might work.
Okay.
So
That'd be worth
give that a
shot.
try.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So this program does work. It's a very simple program. It doesn't seem to be useful at all from the outside. But when you look at the actual code of it, for those of you who are like programmers, you might find it kind of interesting. So what I'll do is I'm going to take a look at the save and code button first, which is the first button. So let me go back to the app first, just to show you which button we are talking about. This button here, save and encode. Okay, so that button corresponds to this code here. So the first thing it does is to make use of TinyDB. So if you look at this part here, it calls tinydb1.storeValue. TinyDB1 is a component that I dragged into this particular application, and you need that particular component in order to be able to save something permanently or in a non-volatile way. Yep.
It says call tinydb, so is that module you're calling?
It's actually just calling a method of the tinydb object, which is already created here. It's a component that is already created. Let me go back a little bit, backstep a little bit here. You can see that tinydb1 is already a component that I dragged into this application. Sorry about that, I forgot to mention it's already a component. So once it's a component, you can make use of a method of a component. And in this case, store value is a method of that particular component that we call tinydb1. And tinydb, the purpose of a tinydb is so that you can save information in a non-volatile way, which also means if you save something using tinydb, you turn off your mobile device, you remove the battery, you put the battery back on, you power up your device again, you start up your app, and you can use tinydb1 in this case to retrieve that information. It's a very handy way to do it because you don't need to know where the file is stored. There's no path that you have to remember. It simply is a place that is associated with this application. Yes?
I was just wondering if you could share the .aia file so we could be looking at options as well.
Okay, we'll do that also. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. And talking about reminders,
Yeah.
I better do this first.
Please, yeah. Stand by what I said.
In a way, if your professor sometimes forgets to take roll because the subject matter is taking all the attention, it may not be such a bad thing.
Google Forms. Google Forms.
Google Forms.
Password of the day.
That's a good way to do it. Then I can use a script to take roll. I don't have to do it manually. All right. So so when you use store value of a tinydb, one thing you need two things. One is the tag, which is basically the name of the thing that you're storing. It's just a name, okay? Nothing more than just a name, an identifier to say that, okay, this is the name of that stuff that I'm saving. It's kind of like the name of a variable, but it's not constrained by the same type of rules of a variable. This one can be more flexible. The second item that you need to use to store a value is simply what value are you storing. Okay, so that's the second notch of this purple block here. And in this particular case, I am saving an entire list. So I'm making a list basically on the fly and say, okay, give me a list. And in fact, this list has two levels. Okay, remember a list is kind of like a folder. So I have a folder that contains another folder and a constant of 0. But in the inner folder, which is this one here, I have the letter A and also the punctuations that I just talked about. Okay, backslash, open square bracket, close square bracket, and a comma. But in this case, they're not quoted. Okay, because when you are specifying the string that you're saving, you don't need to escape all of that stuff. It is done automatically for you. Okay. Are there any questions about what this particular block, what it does? The entire block here, the entire purple block, like this part here. Yep. Sorry?
Where do you get that? It's not in the procedures.
It's not in the procedure because you have to have a TinyDB component first. So the first thing you do is to drag and drop a TinyDB component under storage into the application. And then after that, when you switch to blocks, you should be able to see TinyDB1 as a component, and you click it, and it will give you one of the things you can do is to store value. Yep. Okay, so here's the next question. Okay, some people do not really care, but I'm curious. Where is this stuff really saved? Okay, in other words, TinyDB must have some kind of file representation or database representation in the back end so they can be stored. So I was just curious, and I spent about maybe 15 minutes or half an hour or so doing some research to find out where it is saved, and I found it. Okay, so the next part is it's kind of like a digression in a way, but for people who want to understand how things work and want to understand more about applications, it's not a digression. Okay, it's definitely related to app programming. So the next step here is I want to show you in another text window here how to make a connection to the device that you're debugging, that you're running your app from. Now this will only work if you're using USB or the emulator. It will not work if it is wireless. Okay, but it's kind of cool. Now the regular ADB that you install, doesn't matter whether it's Windows or Linux, it won't work. For whatever weird reason it is, it only works with the ADB or Android. ADB stands for something.
Android Bridge.
Yeah, it's not debug. Yeah,
Isn't it?
it's not debug. It's
Developer.
Android Debug Bridge.
Yeah.
Sometimes DB itself is debug already, but in this case, the D is debug and then the B is bridge. In GDB, it is the new debugger. So that's why I know the name is not the common one. Okay, so the path to the ADB that actually is useful in Linux is here. It's kind of weird. It's under User Google App Inventor, and then in here they have commands for App Inventor, and in here, I need to do a CD. In here, we have all the commands that are specific to App Inventor 2. Okay, so these are the commands that you will also find when you download and install the Android Development Kit, but it's not the same version. These are the older version, or for whatever reason they made changes to it, and they only work in this case. So, but if you're not using Linux, this is not useful. If you're using the portable version of AI Setup, it's in that folder somewhere. I mean, if you just double click on that folder, you will eventually find a folder called Commands for App Inventor, and then in there you will find the ADB command. Okay, so now that we have located the right ADB, I'm going to run the right ADB and then just say, okay, show me the devices. And it shows the correct device. Emulator 5554 is a device. It is the emulator that is running. 5554 is referring to the port number that ADB is connecting, that ADB is using to connect to the emulator. If I start up a different emulator, it will have a different port number. Okay. Okay, so now we can do some really fun stuff. Because ADB has a shell mode. Now, when I run the ADB shell, it is basically remoting into the Android device. Okay, and the pound symbol here is a prompt. It's kind of like a default prompt for a very simple shell. It doesn't show you where you are in the folder, but nonetheless, you can now type commands. Now, in Linux, a fairly typical command that you might want to run is ls, which is to list the current folder. Give me all the files of the current folder, and it shows you all that stuff. pwd is print working directory, so we are at the root directory at this point. Okay, so if you're not really familiar with Linux commands, you can have other resources to look up, get a tutorial on simple Linux commands. Yep.
Is there any difference between? So these are all Linux commands, right?
These are all Linux commands that's being run on the emulator itself. So in other words, when I say ./adb shell, what I'm really doing is kind of like opening a remote session on the emulator itself. Now, because Android is sitting on top of Linux, so that means I'm just using a Linux system right now. It is a very small and minimal installation of Linux. It doesn't come with Bash or all the fancy stuff, but nonetheless, I can do some really kind of basic stuff using the command line. Okay, so now we want to locate where that file is saved. Where is the tinydb saved? And I found it. It's under data. Okay. Yeah, I know it's kind of funny. Why would they name choose a path like that? So in here you will find all the data for all these different apps. So each one is a folder. It is not a file. Each one is a folder, and in the folder you will have everything that is related to that application that is installed. Okay, all the data files, all the little funky stuff that is actually installed. So in this case, if I remember correctly, it's under edu MIT App Inventor .ai Companion 3. So all the data is actually saved under that, not under the name of the application. The reason has to do with I have not installed the application. Okay, the test application that you saw that me run a little bit earlier, was actually being run by AI Companion, and that's why the data that is being saved is also classified under AI Companion and not under the name of the application itself. Now, if I download an APK file and install the APK file, then you will find the application itself having its own folder, but not right now. Okay. So right now, it is under edu.mit, and the regular command line auto completion doesn't work because the shell is kind of minimalist. So I do have to type in the whole command. Okay, so now under this particular folder, which is edu.mit.appinventor.ai Companion 3, which itself is under /data/data, are 3 folders. Some of this stuff is useful, but the one that I want to go to is interestingly shared _ prefs. It is not under files. It is under shared preferences. So under here, if I do a ls, you can see a preferences.xml file that actually contains the I take it back. tinydb1.xml contains the information that we saved using tinydb1 in the application. Yep.
Is it possible to modify?
Sorry?
Is it possible to change?
Yes,
the
you
storage
can
location?
if you want to. Oh, change the location? No, but the content of the file you can change. So
Okay. So even when you program your app, you can't tell it to store it to some other spot?
that is correct. In App Inventor 2, this is the fixed place that it will save its
What about
data.
outside App Inventor?
Outside App Inventor.
Like when you compile the APK.
That I do not know.
Okay.
Yeah, if you compile and install the APK, then it will have its own folder, so it won't be under edu.mit.appinventor.ai Companion 3. It'll be under some funky name that is derived from the App Inventor.
And is this I don't know, like are the permissions on this folder, would that allow me to, because I'm planning on using tinydb for my app,
Well-
would it allow me to back up that tinydb to an external folder like on an SD card?
Well,
At least.
the permissions are set up to be read write, but with app 36. So app 36 is probably an account set up only for this particular application. So that means unless you are root, only this particular application being run as this user have read write access to it.
Okay.
So other applications may or may not be able to see it. If you have a rooted phone, definitely not a problem because root can see everything. But if it's not rooted, I really suspect other folders, other applications cannot see it.
Yeah, that's just one of the things that I hate about Android is like almost nobody builds a proper backup into their application. So unless you have something like Titanium Backup or whatever, it just
Not really. I mean, I have a lot of applications where the backup is backed up onto Dropbox. It gives you a few options of the cloud storage as a backup mechanism.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had like games and stuff where like I'll flash my phone with a different ROM and you install the game. And
They're
all your
starting to
progress
change.
is lost.
Yeah, I think Android is probably having some kind of a backend to make it easier. But I have apps that can. I have at least 2 apps that can save into Dropbox, and it's fairly transparent. You just click save or sync, and it's up to Dropbox.
All right.
Yep. All right. So the interesting part is, when I type this command, cat tinydb1.xml, it is displaying the content of that text file. It is just a regular text file. It's an XML text file. XML stands for extensible markup language. And it's kind of like HTML, except HTML is in a way derived from XML. But what it does, the most important part here is this part here. This is the one item that I saved. It is represented as one single element inside the XML document. String, meaning what is it? It is the name is test, and then the content, from the open tag all the way to the end tag. This part here is the content that is actually being saved. Now you might say, well, but it doesn't even look close to what I used, to display earlier. Okay, where are the double quotes? Well,
There.
in this case, because it's an XML document, all of the double quotes, and all the special characters have to be encoded using the HTML standard, and that's why you see ampersand QUOT semicolon as quote unquote escape, or the way to encode a single double quote. Okay, so we're dealing with multiple standards here. Okay, one standard is the HTML standard, which is why we're using ampersand QUOT semicolon to represent a single double quote. And then getting back to the editor here, this standard is actually JSON, JSON, which is a particular standard for applications to kind of talk to each other and use text and only text to represent something that is structured. So we're dealing with 2 kind of different standards here, but nonetheless, it is kind of interesting. So are there any questions about the stuff over the past half hour or so? And remember, if you cannot follow every single step, it's not an issue. Okay, I just want to show you what I did, what I discovered, for people who are curious about, but I want to dig deeper and find out what is really happening behind the scenes. You can also modify the XML file if you want to. You can pre-install, I suppose you can pre-install something with an XML file too, so you can kind of pre-install with stuff already specified with your application, like default values and stuff like that. It also gives you, knowing this, gives you also the ability to kind of look into the DB1 database in case the application doesn't seem to be working the way it's supposed to. You have now one more way to quote unquote debug your application to find out what is going on with the application. All right, so moving on to the even more exciting part of this lecture. All right, so this is the first part. The first part is really just to save it into the TinyDB, and we just saw how it was represented inside TinyDB. The second one, which is this block here, is saving the serialized version of the list as text, and I'm setting the text of label 4 to that representation. And you can see that over here I have the same construction of the list. I was too lazy to create a variable first and then save it to the variable and then reuse the variable. So I was lazy, I just duplicated it, so that just pop it over here, and now we have the same thing. Okay, but it does emphasize that we are using a list here, and I'm serializing a list. This method here, called serialized JSON, does not exist in App Inventor 2. Okay, this is a subroutine that I wrote to get it done. Okay, now the details of this particular subroutine is a little bit hairy. I would just call it a little bit, not too. It's right here. Serializing JSON is right here, and it makes use of a few things that are useful in App Inventor 2. So for those of you who want to read it, I can make this app available for sharing, so that you guys can download it, dissect it, modify it, play with it, whatever you want to do. One thing that you might want to do before you do any modification is to right-click and say Add Comments. Okay? In other words, you can document the code first. I was kind of in a rush and I didn't have the time to do it. But when you document it, you can now, there's a little call out box here, and now you can start to document your program. Okay, so right click on the block, click on Add Comments in order to make the question mark little bubble to show up, and then click on the bubble to type your comments. So you definitely have all kinds of ways to document your program, even though it's kind of like a GUI block-based type of programming environment. Any questions at this point? Any questions? Okay, so now I want to show you how you can share a project. Okay, so what if I want to share this project with the entire class here? In fact, what if I want to share it with the entire world, everybody else who's using App Inventor 2? To share with this class is easy. Okay, I download the AIA file, okay, and I put it onto Moodle, and you can just click on the link and download it. Okay, so that's too easy. It's not worth my time to explain it. No, I'm just kidding. But I want to show you another way to do it. The other way to do it is to go back to App Inventor 2. So the first thing I want to do is to download it first. So I still need to export the project. So I go to my project here, click on the one that I want to export, go back to projects, and then say export selected project to my computer. So I still need to save a local copy of the AIA file first. Once I do that, I can now go to they keep changing, how to get to it, but I'm pretty sure I can find it. Let me go to Guide and see if I can find Share. Nope, not there. Export, connect. Nope, that's not that. Maybe under. I'll be lazy and just ask Google. Sharing and packaging apps. There we go. But does it use the AIA format? Yep, it does. They used to have a way to do it. I just have to find out.
Under projects, you want the .aia?
No, I got the AIA file, but they used to have a way. It's kind of like a Scratch or YouTube where you can upload a project, and then everybody will be able to see it. There's a link to it, but they don't make that link really visible anymore. And okay, let's look under resources. They don't do that anymore. Okay, I'll do some research and find out, how to do it now. They used to have a link, where you can just kind of click it and go there, and then it's kind of like YouTube. You can just upload the project and type some comments about it, and then everybody else would be able to see the project, and they can download the AIA file directly into their projects, and they can now they can start to modify it and do stuff to it. But they have not. The link is not there anymore, so I'm not quite sure how to do it now. I'm gonna look into it. So for the time being, I'm going to put it onto Moodle, which is kind of like another way to do it, but this way is only limited to people who have access to Moodle at this point. So where should I put it under? I'm just trying to find a good place to put it. I'll put it under basic user interface, okay, even though it's really not exactly basic user interface stuff. So add a file. Okay. Text JSON serializer turns anything into a string. file. It's probably under downloads. Yep, there we go. Open, upload. So this way, you're not only having access to the API or the application file itself, you're having access to the actual source code of the file. So that makes it a little bit more useful. All right. Well, the project is now online. Under Basic User Interface. So under Basic User Interface, if you go all the way to the bottom, there's my JSON serializer. Jason is a serial killer. All right. Okay. Some of you look troubled. All right. So now, what are we gonna do? Next thing is, okay, I like this code. I don't know how it works, but I like it. I want to use it. What can you do about that? Well, sharing code is actually pretty hard across multiple applications in App Inventor 2. So they don't really give you a mechanism where I can define a library and just say, okay, I'm going to export my library to people who want to use my subroutines. So you can just kind of import stuff, easily and just say, oh, okay, here's text subroutine. I want to use it here. They don't really give you a mechanism to do that. So if you want to do something like that, especially for complicated stuff that you don't feel like, okay, I have to copy and paste, manually the whole thing, it's kind of a lot of work. So if you don't want to do that, one thing you can do is to quote unquote do some hacking. So I'm going to open up another text window here to do some hacking here. So I go to my downloads folder and I find my file, which is serialize.aia. Okay, so in Linux there's a command called file, and what it does is it reports back what kind of a file is the file that I have just named here. It doesn't work in Windows, so don't even try it in Windows. Okay, in Linux the extension of a file is useless. Okay, you can name a file any way you want. Okay. This particular tool does not look at the extension to find out what the file is. It actually looks at certain signatures of files in order to find out what it is. So in this case, it identifies that files that ends with AIA in this case is really just a zip file. Okay, you can actually use Windows zip to unzip it. So in this case, I'm going to unzip it and find out what's inside. So let me go ahead and do that. So I'm going to make a new folder just to make sure that it is contained here, and then I use unzip to unzip that folder, unzip that file. So from the messages coming from unzip, you can see that it has 3 files. One file is young Android project / project.properties. That's just properties related to the entire project. One of these files is the source file that you can actually modify, that you can play with. So I'm going to go into src, which is the abbreviation of source, and take a look at this. Go to App Inventor, AI Onion Serialize. Okay, so now we have those 3 files: screen1.bky, screen1.scm, and screen1.yale by AIL. So we'll take a look at screen1.bky first, and that's a that describes all the blocks. We'll take a look at the other ones first. Okay, this is the one that we want, but I want to take a look at the other ones as well. SCM looks like well, that looks kind of cryptic, doesn't it? Okay, and then we have the last one, screen1.yal, and that's a list. That's a Lisp file. Okay. The one that actually contains the quote-unquote source is the first one. Okay, the first one actually contains the source. So if you see something that you want to copy into your own project, you will have to unzip my project to get to this point. You have to unzip your project to get to this point. Okay. Okay. So now what I want to do next is to start up an empty project, because I want to show you how you can do this. Okay, how you can actually do something like this. So I'm going to start a project and say copycat. Okay, this project is called copycat because I want to copy one of the functions from the other one. Okay, so this is called copycat. It doesn't have anything really useful, and I'm going to save it. So I select copycat, and I say export selected project, and now I have a copycat.ini file. And I will open up another prompt, to get to that particular place, so I don't lose my spot here. So I'm going to go back to all the way to my downloads folder, make a folder for copycat, go to copycat, and unzip, the copycat AIA file over here. So now I have two projects already, saved, and I go to the most important part here, which is under source app inventor AI T, which is based on my login name, and then copycat. Okay, so I have the same three files. The other two files are created based on the first one, so they are not necessarily, they don't, you don't need to modify the other two files. BKY is the one that you need to modify. So in this case, let me see. Okay, mousepad is probably easier because I can show you how to do it. So I'm going to use an editor to look at screen1.bky from this folder, which is empty. Well, that's perfectly normal because it is an empty project to begin with. Okay, and then we'll take a look at the other one. And the other one is right here. So we'll use a simple editor. You can use Notepad in Windows for this purpose. It's just a text file. So we'll use mousepad and then screen1.bky. And this one is not so simple because it has all the code. So inside here, we want to find the procedure, which is, I think it should be this one. So let me double check on. Okay, I can do one quick thing and just look for the name. Find, serialize. Next. Just passed it, I think. So that's calling procedure. It's not defining the procedure. I might have missed it already. Go back to the beginning. There we go. I think this is the one. Yep. This is the one because it is defining, this block is a procedure and it has a return value. So this is the right one. So we'll go ahead and copy this block here. So when you copy a block, you have to start with the block open tag and then find the matching closed end tag for that block, which is down there somewhere. There we go. Okay, so now we have found the closed tag here. No, I take it back. That's the wrong one. It is this one here. Because this one has the name of serialize. There we go. Passed. There we go. So we do a Control-C to copy this text here, switch to the other one, and just paste it. Like so. Save the other one. And now we have no use of these two editors. Switch back to the command prompt here. If you're using Windows, you don't need to use the command line. Because in Windows, you can right-click on a folder and then select send to in order to create the zip file. It's just that after you create the zip file, you have to rename it back to AIA as the extension. You cannot use ZIP as the extension. All right, so we are back to here, and copycat is the one that I have to reconstruct. So to reconstruct a project, you have to do basically the reverse of the unzip. So you have to zip it in this case. So we're going to zip, in this case, -R to specify recursively. In Windows, you don't have to learn all of this stuff here because you can just right-click on the folder, so it makes it a lot easier. So -R, and then the folder, and the new name is going to be copycat1.aia, which is in the parent folder, and I want everything in this particular folder to be included. So that's what the asterisk means. And now the the new AIA file is now created. It's called copycat1.aia. So now I switch back to App Inventor and click on Projects and say import AIA from my computer. Choose that file from the downloads. It is now called copycat1.aia and open it. Click OK. And now we have copycat1.aia. There's nothing here, in this screen because I did not add any components. But if I switch to blocks, I should see the procedure. Yeah, yes, I do. Okay. Once again, this is not, something that you have to understand. I will not ask you to do this for a homework assignment or for a test. Okay, but for your own benefit. Sorry.
How about for extra credits?
Extra credit. Well, it does make your job easier, okay? Because, I usually would demonstrate a concept in class before I ask you to do something in your own homework assignment. So this gives you the ability to basically, quote-unquote, copy and paste code from my stuff into your programs, okay? The only thing you have to be careful about is the location of this, whatever you're pasting in is based on my screen. It's based on, where it is sitting on in my application, so it might overlap with some other stuff that you have. You just have to move it around and clear the space to make it available. But other than that, it has the whole thing. I mean, this is the entire function that I wrote here. And now this part does not work. Call escape. This one is not supposed to be here. It's just set result to. I might be copying from the wrong project. But the basic idea is still the same. I might have been using the wrong project. Right. So any questions about the steps to kind of copy and paste code? It's not as easy as you think. Unfortunately, they don't make it easy to copy code. Any questions about what we have done here? No questions? Yeah, it wasn't the right one because you can see that this is serialized. It was something that I wrote last year. And that's why it didn't work, because it relies on the function called escape. But if you want to do it with test list, this is the one that I wrote like last night. So I must have, did I upload the wrong one then?
Yes.
To Moodle? Okay. Well, the other one still works, but it's not conforming to the JSON format. It's kind of like my format. So I'm gonna re-upload the other one too. So let's just change this one to the other one.
Yeah, leave that one out.
You want to leave this one up here?
Yeah, just rename it.
Okay. Let's go ahead and rename this one. Oops. Okay, text non-JSON serializer. How's that? Clear enough? Then we have the JSON serializer. And we'll call this text actual JSON serializer. There we go. That should be clear. called test serial. It's not downloaded yet. So that's okay. I can switch back to here. This one. Export. Oops. Go back to Moodle. And it's here now. Right. Okay, so now you have both versions. Okay, the non, JSON conforming one, and then the JSON conforming one. Now the JSON conforming one is particularly useful because you can now use it to talk to anything that can talk JSON, which is really, really helpful. The other one is useful, but only within your own type of application. So it has a limited application. Right. So now that is out of the way, we can now go back to focus on how do we pass something from one screen to another screen. Okay, which is kind of the whole purpose of this whole discussion here. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that. Yeah, the last time we tried this, it was actually working already, but I made one mistake, that I did not realize in class, and that was why it didn't seem to be working last time. Yep.
Under the projects, it has import from repository. How do you do that option?
Let's try it. Import from a repository. Built-in templates. Add a new template library URL. Doesn't specify. So you have to somehow create your own template library place on the web in order for this to work. But it doesn't have any instructions as far as I can tell, at least not right here to do it. Well, it's complaining about not having access to the repository. Okay, so getting back to how to pass stuff across screens, how to start another screen, pass something to it, and then pass something back to the original screen. So we'll start with this one here. So I just call this new screen application, because that's all it's going to do is to create a new screen, pass something around, and it's all done. Okay, so we'll use two things because I want to make sure that lists can be done. So we'll have two labels in the original screen, which will be useless until we return from the other screen, and a button to actually trigger the switching of the two screens. And we'll add another screen here, which is called screen 2. It's fine. So we switch to, oops. Okay, so now that we're in screen 2, it will also have two labels so that we can show the two things that we got from the first screen, and a button so that we can go back to the previous screen, but also pass along two things back to the previous screen. Okay, this one is not really necessary because we can always specify when back is pressed, do something. But I just want to make it more explicit. Now let's switch back to screen 1 and program button 1. So we go to blocks here, look under screen 1, and look under button 1 because we want to trigger the creation of the new screen. So when you say when button 1 is clicked, we go ahead and try to trigger the other screen. To trigger the other screen, you have to use control. Under control, you have to use open another screen using a particular value. The screen name of the other one is just screen 2. So you have to use a string here to specify the name of the other screen, which is screen 2. And the start value, in this case, I can easily know that it will work for strings, regular strings, so I'm not going to test that. What I'll do is I will create a list of only 2 items. And for the simplicity for this test here, I'll just use 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so 1, 2 is for passing to the second screen, and then 3, 4 to pass back to the first screen. Okay. So now I have a button 1 to pass a list of 2 items to the second screen. Okay, it has 2 components. In the second screen, when it is created, when it's initialized, it is going to take whatever is given to it and display it in label 1 and label 2 of the second screen. So I look at screen 2 and go to when screen 2 is initialized. Then we'll take a look at the start values. So here we'll go to label 1 and then set label 1 text to the first item of the start value. And then we'll do the same thing with the second one. So then we go to lists here and we say select list item, and then the list is just our start value. So we go to control here to look for get start value and stash it here. Now here I'm making this program is only for the demonstration that we can pass lists around, okay? But if you're not doing this as a demonstration and you're actually putting in your application, you really want to test it first, okay? You want a conditional statement to say that if start value is in fact a list, then go ahead and do this, okay? Because otherwise, if it is not a list, it's going to give you a runtime error, and that would not be nice. But since I'm kind of just testing this, so I'm gonna do it this way without error checking. Okay, so we'll pick the first item. Remember, it starts with 1 and not 0, like in other programming languages. And then we'll duplicate this into the second one. So label 2 will have the value of the second item in the list. I can probably try to finish the entire program first before I test it, but since I really like to test things before too long, so I'm going to test it now just to make sure that the program works the way it's supposed to. And you can see the emulator is already reflecting changes to this particular new project, which is great. So I click the button on the first screen to start with the second screen. But when the second screen starts up, I should see not text for label 1 and text for label 2. Instead, I should see the number 1 and 2, because that's what's being passed when I create the second screen.
You're on the second screen.
Oh, and that's because I'm here. This is the other thing. It is a limitation of AI Companion. When you're running AI Companion, which means you have constant communication between App Inventor and your device, it doesn't work well with applications that have multiple screens. So the only real way to get around this problem is to use build and use an APK file. Okay, so I'm going to build and use an APK file, and then we'll go ahead and install the APK file and run it from the APK on the other side to make this work. It's really cumbersome, but that's the only way that you can actually reliably debug an application that has multiple screens. So new screen .apk is now downloaded onto my local computer, and now I'm going to go back to the screen that has ADB. I'm done with ADB in a shell mode, so I'm going to say exit to get out of it. So now I'm back to the Linux environment, or if you're using Windows using CMD, you'll be back into the CMD portion. So back here, I can now say ADB, and then install is the command that I can use to install a particular application. And in this case, the application is located in my downloads folder, and it's called what was it again? New screen .apk. And this command will install the application remotely. In other words, it's a command that you run on the PC side, and it will take that APK file and install it onto the device that is connected to ADB or to the tool. So now on the other side, in the emulator, we should see that. But we are still in AI Companion at this point. So the first thing I have to do is to kind of get out of AI Companion. Okay, so I can stop this application. It's okay to stop it. Stop and exit. And I would go to this folder here, and we should see new screen here, right here. So I just click it, and now I'm running the application without the use of AI Companion. And this is screen 1. Click the button, it starts up screen 2. It breaks the list apart into 2 components and extract each one and use each one on a particular label. So the program is working up to this point, okay, which is good. It's encouraging. Okay, so the second thing now that we have to do is to go back to my source code here and finish it up. In other words, in screen 2, when the button is clicked, I want to go back to screen 1, but I also want to pass along a return value, and it's going to be a list of 3 and 4 in this case. So we switch back to the blocks mode and say when button 1 is clicked, that's okay, that's fine, it's not a problem. When button 1 is clicked, then we'll go ahead and pass 2 things back. To pass something back, you have to go to control and you specify close screen with value of some kind. Okay, with a value, and the result is going to be a list. So we'll go to list again, make a list of 2 items. And these 2 items, well, I mean, you don't need to use numbers, you can definitely use strings too. So I'll just go ahead and use strings here. And the first string will spell out 3, and then the other string will spell out 4, like so. And that's it. Okay, this is my second screen. Back to the first screen, I have to intercept the second screen returning back to it. So in the first screen, I will also need to go to screen 1 and handle the event called other screen closed with result. So I will use this block here. Now if you have multiple screens that this screen can start up, you really need to check the quote-unquote other screen name so that you know where am I coming back from, okay? But since in this particular application, screen 2 is the only screen that can go back to screen 1, I'm not going to do that check. But I'm just saying that for your application, you need to do something. If you have multiple screens, they can start from screen 1. So in this case, I can go ahead and set label 1 and label 2 accordingly. I'll set the text property of both of these labels to assuming result is a list already. So I can go to lists and say select an item from the list. Which list are we talking about? It is the list that we call result here, that is coming back from the other screen, and the first item. So we have to go to math and select this item here and turn it to 1. And then I'll just replicate this particular block to deal with the second label, which is going to handle the second item from the list. Okay. So at this point, the application is done already. I'm going to download it again, and I'm not using the emulator directly from App Inventor 2 anymore. Okay, I have to use the APK installation in order to test programs like this. If you're doing this on an actual device, it can be easier. You don't need to use ADB, especially if you already have Dropbox installed on your device. So you can basically get the APK file, upload it to Dropbox. On the Android device, you have the Dropbox application, and then from there you can download it back again and install it. Right. Or you can just use this feature because it gives you the QR code for the APK file. Okay, so I'm done here. It has a new name of new screen in parentheses 1 locally, and this is not going to work. Okay, but I do want to show you, the message that you will get, when it doesn't work. Oh no,
Like that.
it lost communication with the emulator because the emulator is not there anymore.
Interesting.
Okay.
Run.
There's I can just run emulator directly from here without doing it from inside
Yeah.
the.
App Inventor.
Yep. So I'm running the emulator directly from using the command called run emulator. It does the same thing, it just starts up the emulator. And I want to check that, make sure that I am still recording because I think this is one of those lectures that someone may want to watch again. Okay, so the emulator is now started, and I'm going to re-upload or reinstall the application. Okay, so we do ADB start. maybe ADB devices first. Yep, it found it. So now we can go ahead and reinstall. Yep, it fails, but you can see the message why it's failing. It says install failed because the application is already there. Okay, now it doesn't mean that you have to go through all the trouble to uninstall it first and then reinstall it. There's a flag or a switch in ADB that allows you to do this without having to go through all the process. And of course I have to read it first. Okay, so I think it's one of these options here. Reinstall the application, keeping its data. So it's under, it's a -R option here. So there we go. Specify install -R and then the file name. So this time it will upload the file first and then it will reinstall the application, but without losing what is already stored, if anything is already stored with that application. Sorry?
Cool.
Yeah, it is. Alright, so now in the emulator, we have the application reinstalled. AI Companion is not working because I'm not relying on AI Companion for this type of debugging. I look at all the applications. New screen is still here, but this is the updated new screen. And I click text for button 1, which is the only button on screen 1. Screen 2 still does what it's supposed to. Okay, now if I click the button on screen 2, we should switch back to screen 1, and then once we switch back to screen 1, label 1 and label 2 of screen 1 should update to the 3 and 4 spelled out. So we'll see. Yep, it works. All right. So are there any questions about the demonstration here with passing information from one screen to the next? Okay, tell me again, just so that I know that you know, why are we doing this? Why do we want to pass a list instead of something simple like a number or just some text? Say again?
We want to pass something a bit more complex.
Yep, you can pass any. Using this way, using the concept of a list, which is a folder, basically it's just a container, but using that concept, you can now pass something basically as complex as you want it to be. It can be a simple item like a number. It can be an entire form, okay, with different fields, and you can have lists inside the list, or whatever. However you want to make it complicated, however complicated you want it to be, you can now pass it as a single item, as a start value. When the other screen is done processing and need to pass the processed data back to the first one, now you also have the ability to make it as complex as you want it. Okay, so that is why I kind of want to focus on using the concept of a list instead of a single item like a string or a number for passing information between the screens. All right. Any other questions? Yep. Go ahead.
So is that anything like a class then?
No. App Inventor 2 does not have the concept of a class. In other words, you cannot, in runtime, there's no way to stamp out new things, and use those, at runtime. So you have to have all the components created at design time, and those are the only things you can use. You cannot say, at runtime, oh, I want a new text field here. Can't do that. So it doesn't have that flexibility. Right.
Oh, I just want to get another look at screen 2.
Oh.
On the MIT
To look at the blocks?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to switch to screen 2, blocks. I can also upload this one.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. So let me do that instead. So go to projects, click this one, download or export, select the project, and go back to Moodle and add this one as a resource.
You should set up on your Google Drive a spot for all your .aias for us, and then we just look there for
Sure. Yeah. So this one's called New Screen, using lists to pass values. Okay. This program shows you how to pass mechanisms from one screen to another. Now you have to remember, we have two mechanisms here. One is to start another screen, and the other one is to close a screen to go back to a previous screen. And those two mechanisms, they can both utilize lists, and it's demonstrated in this particular sample program. So now we go to choose files, and it's called new screen. .aia upload. We have it. So now we can download, all the, the three sample programs that I kind of mentioned today, and do whatever you want with those. Okay. Any questions about the concept that we are talking about today? I would focus more on the rationale of why are we talking about this more than the details of which command did you type on the command line, because that you can just rewind the tape and play it. But in terms of the concept, if I didn't talk about the concept and you didn't quite, get the concept and I talked about it, it's not on the tape. So I would want you guys to ask questions about the rationale of the topics rather than the details of the topics. So are there any questions about, why the things that I talked about today may be important in your particular project or in app, or in app programming in general?
So it's kind of hard to. So the event handling we have, is that kind of like a counter towards us not being able to develop our own classes? Like, because when I'm thinking about
You mean the when block?
Yeah.
Okay, the when block is the only way you can intercept an event and say, okay, when this happens, do something here. Okay, so that's the only way you can basically start an action in App Inventor. It maps to certain concepts, like they have event handling also when you move on to cisp363, but in that class, event handling takes on the form is different. Okay, so what you do is you register with the Android system and say, oh, when this event happens, I want you, the Android system, to call this particular method. Okay, so that's how it's done in cisp363, which is actually quite a bit more complex because you have to understand the whole hierarchy of stuff first. But in this class, that's the only way you can do it. So it really is not about classes. It's really just how do you trigger your own code to execute based on something that is external to the application, like someone clicking something or someone touching the screen and stuff like that. All right. Any other questions? No one wants to know what JSON stands for?
JavaScript object notation.
Yep. JSON. JSON.
JavaScript
Oh,
object notation.
right there. JavaScript object notation is a lightweight data interchange format. So it's basically a syntax description to show people how to construct a string to represent basically stuff that can be represented. And it has its own syntax. This is the old way of describing syntax, by the way. If you go to college, the time that I went to college and studied Pascal, this is how Pascal syntax was specified, using bubbles and diagrams and stuff. Yep.
Your screen instructions, when you go to recompile, it just doesn't work. I've tried several different ways.
What do you mean by recompile?
When you do APK tool, B, and then where the name of your folder is, it complains.
It complains?
Yeah.
Okay, that I haven't really played around yet, but you don't need that for what we talked about today.
Is there another way to do the recompiling with that information?
With what information?
With the folder, when you go to download it to edit the XML file, the manifest.
That doesn't need any recompilation. You just need to repack it, just zip it back.
Right, repackage it. Is there a way,
It's
another
just
way
zip.
to do it?
No, you just zip it. Because it's just a zip file containing like the 4 files in the 2 folders. If you change one of the files, you just have to recreate the zip file make sure you rename the extension to AIA because otherwise,
You have the .apks.
the APK is a different story. But what I described today only works on the AIA file, which contains the source, but not the APK file, which contains the quote-unquote executable, actually.
Okay.
Yep. I'm suspecting APK tool might have an update or there's a replacement tool to do that. But I don't know yet. I haven't really gotten to APK tool yet. All right, so that's it for today. If you think that this stuff is going a little bit too fast, just focus on the concept first. Okay, try to understand why that topic is important, and then from there, you can go back into the details by rewatching the video. Yep.
Is there any particular lecture section we should be reading? I know what kind of.
We can continue to look into storing something offline, using the web as a resource to store something. Yep. And keep thinking about your project too, because that's kind of important too. Yep.
Two quick questions. One is for our web, the